of older people in it. Again, it's about making sure we're trying to provide for the people who are using our cities, not for us. So what does it mean for our open spaces in neighbourhoods? And there's a piece of research out of Edinburgh University that talks about familiarity is very important. So any changes to an open space should be small and done incrementally, so not enormous changes. Streets should, with varied urban form, are easier to recognise than streets that are all the same. So if you're going for a walk and you're trying to find your way home and there's little roads off and they're all the same, it can be very hard for somebody to find their way back. It can be difficult to read the types and use of open spaces, so making public and private clearly identified can be very important. And safety can become important. As people lose their memory, they actually become vulnerable to putting themselves in unsafe situations without knowing about it. So this can be helped by having low rather than high fences and walls and hedges, so that people can see architectural features and landmarks and house numbers and names of things. Maps and written directions can be difficult for people. So landmarks become very... I use landmarks a lot anyway, you know, I think a lot of us do. But I think we forget that increasingly for older people, you know, you turn left at this, you go right there, and I think landmarks are very, very important anyway. So things like in our community churches and clock towers, art, places of activity, such as parks and playgrounds and urban squares, all these have become very important. Confusion. If the street is too cluttered, it becomes too confusing for older people. And they prefer simple, well-connected street layouts that can help with their concentration. There is some evidence out of this research that colours are important, that some people, older people, have difficulty distinguishing blue-greens, but also that sharp contrasts can be disorienting. So there's obviously a range of colours that are suitable and more acceptable and helpful for people. There's also a similar thing with lighting. They found that people require 2 to 5 times as much light as young people, but deep shadow and bright light and glare are difficult for older people. So I think these are different sorts of issues that might need to be considered. I'll tell you about the photograph in a minute, or why that photograph. Signs in the landscape or in the street can be confusing if there are too many of them or if they're too complicated. So useful signs are simple, have the essential information, not too much information, and realistic symbols, they're large and clear lettering, and too many perpendicular signs are confusing. And this research particularly showed that this sign, which you may not be able to read, it's a bit blurry, says post office, is very good in our country for old people. Now, I think there's 2 reasons for that, probably. One is it's a long-standing symbol. This is what a post office is and where it is, so their long-term memory may remember it, because it's simple to see. It is white on black, it's just round, it's not fancy, so it's very easy. And when I first discovered this, I found this was quite fun, really. But directional signs can be important at decision points such as crossings and junctions. So as people get older, their walking may become slower and steady, shuffling, and they can't always interpret where other pedestrians might go. I found that a bit with your traffic here anyway. You might be in one lane and the cars or the bikes all cut across. But it can be like that for people who are older and who are trying to navigate. So back to wide footpaths, interestingly. Changes of level, these can be problematic because of people becoming frail and unsteady. And for some people, dementia means they eventually can't walk because that part of the brain shuts down. And as that process is happening, they are very, very vulnerable to falls, let alone whether old people might have osteoporosis, that is weakening the bones. So this is something that needs to be done. So even slight changes in level can cause stumbling, and steep changes can be very difficult. So these elements need to be really carefully thought about. We had somebody do our 2-year master's course, but he only did 1 year because he was getting so much work. He went off and carried on being in practice, and he was working on care homes for older people. And the one thing I want to bring to you from his work is about plants and older people and the different things to consider or how they might be used. So of course, non-poisonous plants, it's a fairly obvious thing to think about, but also that they can be used in different ways. So they can be used in culinary ways. So I think you do that a lot more here than we do at home. We might grow some herbs, but nursing homes who might be looking after older people don't necessarily do that, partly because they probably think they haven't got the time. And using plants for craft activities can be really helpful and good as well. And if we might want to encourage older people to grow things, we need to be using plants that are easy to propagate and easy to grow. So we're back to sensory stimulation as well. So for old people, sight and smell and touch and sound are important. And the ability to try and stimulate memory and creativity, because with old people, if their memory goes, it's short-term memory that goes first, and then long-term memory goes. So some of remembering them, reminding them things of their childhood or things they used to do. Sometimes people use photos, but even in the landscape, things that might trigger memories, positive memories hopefully, can be good. And planting can help to create, stimulate creativity as well. And just planting and cutting flowers and bringing them in can be all very meaningful activities. So plants in themselves can play a role in making a better quality of life for people who might have dementia. So here's my friend Phil again in his wheelchair, showing some people around an open space and how to assess it. So in the way that there's the green flag assessment, and we've developed a tool for play. He done some work on an accessibility tool. And here is a board for people who are blind or visually impaired, and you can see that it's got raised elements so that they can read it in their own way. This is actually a sensory garden. But what is an inclusive city? And having just shown you a sensory garden, I'm going to say several things. First of all, it's not about designing for wheelchair users, which is the culture in our country. I'm not sure if it's like that here or not. It's not about designing for sensory gardens, which is the last photo I showed. It is about taking account of different people's needs and desires and bringing those together in a holistic way, which is why I sort of expressing that in order to design holistically, we do need to deconstruct what disability is, understand some of the different impairments, what those mean for people in the built environment, and then how we can support them so that they can actually move freely and access and enjoy our cities in the way that everybody should be able to in those earlier definitions of what inclusive means. And we don't always do that. But I believe that by doing this deconstruction of understanding what people's needs might be, we actually provide much better environments for everybody anyway. And I think we should be doing that as designers. Now, there are some people who take this discussion about what is inclusivity beyond the areas I've explored with you, and they talk about inclusive urbanism. And they take a very broad definition, looking at there are rich and poor in every city. I see them here, I see them in my own city, perhaps more extreme here, I would say. Different ethnicities. You have that here, we have it particularly in our major cities. And these people who sort of have talked about inclusive urbanism also talk about, sometimes there are differences even between businesses and arts people within cities about what is right, sometimes not appreciating each other. They also say that an inclusive urbanism approach is about production of goods, it's about knowledge, it's about learning, it's about play. So taking very, very broad understanding of inclusive urbanism. Different people, students, workers, retirees. In our city, there's sometimes a little bit of conflict between the students and the people who live permanently in the city. Sometimes if the students have been having very noisy parties late at night, and sometimes they leave too much rubbish out, it really annoys the local people. So an inclusive urbanism would be everybody seeking to not disrupt everybody else's enjoyment of the place, I think. These people talk about products from the surrounding countryside as well being included in the cities, and I think that's quite a challenge for some of us. Children and adults, people of all varieties and of abilities and disability, they're saying. New immigrants, visitors and founding families, so inclusivity and inclusive urbanism would make all these people feel equally welcome and equally accommodated for. This is such a big issue, not just in built environment terms, but in so many ways in Europe at the minute because of the migration of people from various countries into Europe. And inclusive governance that should help to bring all of these perspectives into the shaping of the city. So the inclusive urbanism goes much further than the built environment professions approaches do. They all begin to touch on policy because we don't operate in a vacuum, and they may touch on funding, they will definitely touch on practice. And we were discussing something earlier where you can have policy, but unless that policy is put into practice through our professions, the people won't benefit from it. So it's really important that this, whatever approach we're taking, trickles down, and hopefully an inclusive approach. So here's just a few other pictures of some activities that seem to be fairly inclusive, I think, in different ways in some of our cities. Some of our parks, I think, are quite inclusive. Lots of different sorts of people seem to use them, and some have claimed that our urban spaces are the most democratic of spaces that we can have, but we know that sometimes people are controlled from them. Sitting opportunities provides for inclusivity in cities, and one of my colleagues has been doing a project about benches, movable benches in cities, and she's been having great fun actually in finding some that they really are bringing communities together. Sometimes it's just seats outside a cafe. So there are lots of different ways that in the physical form the inclusive city can be expressed. And I'm going to finish there. There's a whole load of references at the end of here, I think. So thank you very much. That's some thinking about inclusive cities.
What exactly is meant by social and environmental values?
Social and environmental values. Barriers. So these are things that stop disabled people being fully involved. So in the work we did with children in school playgrounds, the social values would be the values of the school. Okay, so, and the policies of the school, perhaps not. And sometimes these barriers are not put there. People don't put barriers in place. I think very often society is operating not realising it's created barriers. So I think a lot of these schools think they're doing good things for the children, but what they don't always understand is the consequences of their actions by saying, okay, before you can get onto the playground, this and this is going to happen, but you'll be late. So that's a social barrier, because it's a social and organisational barrier, because it's the way the school is sort of processing that child, rather than letting the child choose. The child might say, actually, can I just leave the class 5 minutes earlier so I can be on the playground at the same time as my other friends? So it's about things that are happening in society, or in institutions in society perhaps, that are meaning that disabled people are not getting that reasonable, that same opportunity as other people.
If the design is trying to empower them, the social barriers can be eradicated.
Hopefully, but I think in order for the design to change, sometimes we need to tackle those social issues. So in schools, one of the issues is making sure that head teachers, in particular in our country who hold a lot of power, understand that play is important, and that it's important for the disabled children to be out on the playground at the same time as the non-disabled children. So part of our responsibility as professionals, I think, is to help other people learn these things, so that those barriers might be overcome, and then the practice in the built environment can change. It's similar in a way to some of the things that's happened just in our ordinary school playgrounds. They are so badly designed because head teachers don't see the importance. So often there are adults or able-bodied people holding power because they are making decisions, and as built environment professionals we often are working within those policies that exist, but they may not be good policies. So I do think part of our role is to try and see if we can educate people, not in a big E, but a little educate, and we do it in a constructive and positive way. We don't say, you're doing this all wrong. We come in and say, have you thought of doing it this way? Or what about these sorts of benefits? So I think that's what we're meaning by social and institutional barriers.
What exactly comes under an environmental barrier?
Well, I think I have to go back to that other piece of work, because I can't remember. So environmental barriers might be physical things. I think they're the same as physical. So you may, excuse me, let me have some water.